Thank you all for joining us for our SICSS-Howard Mathematica Funded Alumni Research in Progress Roundtable. During these Real Talk Roundtables, our hosting organizations, Howard, Mathematica, and SICSS, discuss the experiences of people of color within their institutions or offer tips and tricks for success. In the case of our SICSS panel today, the three teams who received SICSS-Howard Mathematica Inaugural Excellence in Computational Social Science Research Awards will be presenting their research projects in progress. They are PhD students, early career faculty, and postdocs who attended SICSS-Howard Mathematica site in 2021 and were successful in getting funding. They are currently where you want to be. I would recommend you learn about their projects, listen to their trajectory, and ask them questions so you can create a project that gets you funding this year from us, from the SICSS umbrella organization, and also throughout your career. Participants at the SICSS-Howard Mathematica site will have a chance to ask questions about their projects and get to know them during the second day of Praxis to Power. And our friends on the continent in Cameroon, Nigeria, and South Africa will get to watch that live Q&A video on the SICSS-Howard Mathematica site once it is posted. For now, I encourage you to settle in, listen, and learn.
Hello, everyone. My name is Todd Hall, and I am a rising third-year PhD student in education policy at the University of Virginia. I participated in SICSS between my first and second year in the PhD program, and I am very grateful for the continued support of SICSS-Howard Mathematica, as well as Nanette for facilitating this opportunity to share about this ongoing work. This is pre-service sentiment, analyzing transcripts from a student avatar experiment in a classroom management simulation. It's quite a mouthful and a long title, but hopefully in this next 15 minutes, I will be able to unpack this project and how it relates to my broader interest. I primarily do research on early childhood education, as well as discipline in both early childhood and K-12 settings. And this takes a step back from discipline in particular to look at classroom management in general and potential racial biases that may relate to classroom management. This is work that I'm leading along with my co-advisor who's supporting Dr. Vivian Wong, who's a professor here at UVA. So I will be doing several acknowledgements throughout this, this little talk. And in part, this project is really indebted to a larger project here at UVA, which is called TeachSim. And TeachSim is a research partnership led by principal investigators Dr. Julie Cohen and Vivian Wong that uses mixed reality simulations for teacher preparation. So imagine you are a pre-service teacher, you're in a teacher education program at an institution like UVA. You walk into a room and you see a large TV, and on that TV is this image with 5 student avatars. And this essentially is a simulation where you can practice interacting with students and setting and establishing classroom norms or facilitating a discussion of a text as if you were a teacher, but within this simulated virtual environment. And each of these student avatars is controlled by someone called an interactor who manipulates their movements and also voices over so that the student avatars are actually responding in real time to your practice as a pre-service teacher. So when I started at UVA, I thought this was a really cool project, and I was particularly drawn to one experiment that had been done within this project. So in spring 2018, Dr. Julie Cohen and Vivian Wong, the PIs, as well as the research scientist Anandita Krishnamachari, ran an experiment in the simulator to examine whether how pre-service teachers evaluate off-task behavior differs by implicit association test, whether there's sort of a racial preference, and whether a short coaching intervention can mitigate racial biases. So that's a lot of terminology and perhaps jargon. One way to understand the experiment they ran is through this image. You see there are 2 student avatars named Ethan, and pre-service teachers were randomly assigned to encounter a student avatar that either had blonde hair, blue eyes, a sort of white phenotype, or a phenotype with dark skin and a high top fade. And so their research question was really about whether there are differences in how these pre-service teachers rate and evaluate these students who exhibit off-task behaviors in surveys that were administered immediately after the simulation. And then they also randomly assigned a coaching intervention to see if potential biases in how they respond to these student avatars were mitigated by a coaching intervention. So when I joined this research team in August of 2020, and I have been eyeing this experiment, and I was curious to do further analyses or extensions, but I didn't exactly have the tools. And I was curious about the language that the pre-service teachers were using in the simulator, as well as how they were describing their experiences interacting with these student avatars. And that led me to my 2 research questions, which are, do pre-service teachers use different words to address and describe off-task behaviors depending on the phenotype of the student avatar? And do pre-service teachers express more negative sentiment when addressing and describing off-task behavior depending on the phenotype of the student avatar? So this particular experiment could offer insight into something called the differential selection hypothesis in classroom management or discipline disparities. And that hypothesis states that Black students don't exhibit any higher rates of misbehavior, but rather they are singled out and reprimanded more often, particularly for subjective offenses such as disrespect or excessive noise. And so as I read in my interest in discipline disparities, I found that the simulator could be a really interesting and useful context, because the off-task behaviors that the student avatars exhibit are things like making noises or beatboxing, sort of these more subjective infractions that might be considered oppositional defiant behavior, or might be viewed, might be more prone to biases. There's also evidence from other research looking at implicit bias among teachers that that's associated with larger Black-white student discipline gaps. And then there's a really interesting study by Zhu and Shi that shows that Black students are suspended for longer than white students, even when they're involved in the exact same disciplinary infraction. So they use statewide data from North Carolina, and they can look at, for like an individual fight, they found that Black students were suspended for longer periods than the white student involved in the same fight. So the classroom simulator is an interesting context because it is one with pre-service teachers. So it's looking at an earlier point in teachers' career preparation, and also because, again, it has these subjective off-task behaviors. So I was sort of ruminating on this idea for a while, but SICSS was really the catalyst for that idea that I had been sitting on. So I joined the TeachSim project as a research assistant, working with qualitatively coding transcripts in August of 2020. I wrote a proposal on something like this that I just described in December 2020. January 2020, I made a small proposal for the TeachSim team and just basically voiced my interest in doing this, but it wasn't anything detailed or actionable, or I didn't really have a plan. And I mentioned this project in my SICSS application. So if you are coming in and thinking like, there are some data out there that exist, or there's something that I want to study, but I don't really have the expertise, I think going into SICSS thinking, how can I take what I'm learning and apply it, or how can I find people who have the skills that I'm looking to develop and collaborate with them, is a great frame, because I think you get more out of it, and you get to actually apply what you're learning in real time. So that was definitely my SICSS experience in June of 2021, where I went in having this idea in the back of my head and thinking like, let me focus on the sentiment analyses, and let me focus on understanding the structure of text data and how to use R, because I was thinking this is something that I could apply as a use case. And then in November 2021, there was this SICSS funding opportunity, and that really sort of was the kick in the pants to actually take this idea, go back to Vivian Wong and Julie and Anandita and say, hey, like, literally in my email, it says, this was on the back burner, but this SICSS opportunity came up, and I think it's a really good action forcing mechanism, and I think it would be a really good way to sort of actually enact some of the things that I was learning. And so we met and we carved out the scope of work and thought about like, okay, where the other project ends and where this project begins. And I got their blessing, and I'm very grateful for their support to be able to tackle this project and then to receive support from SICSS to bring it to fruition. So uses of the funding are twofold. One is that I am kind of coming full circle. So I started out on this team as a qualitative coder, and with the SICSS funding, I'll be able to hire qualitative coders, so undergraduate research assistants who will be able to read the transcripts according to a protocol that I developed and essentially annotate to document like what practices and what types of sentiment or description the teachers are using in response to the student avatar. They would be like blinded to the phenotype of the avatar, but then using that, I can compare across whether pre-service teachers use different language and whether they had different sentiment. I'm also going to use different sentiment dictionaries, and one of them is the Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, or LUC software. And LUC would enable me to measure language polarity, so that's positive or negative, and identify words associated with certain social processes like hierarchy and exclusion. And LUC is a sort of widely applied and validated system for measuring language. So I was also asked to talk about how SICSS influenced this project in me. The first component is really sort of at the intersection of this project and myself, which is just giving me more confidence to see myself as a computational social scientist, to see other Black computational social sciences. One of the things that I really loved about it is that I was doing it just after the first year of my PhD program, but we had people who were at all different stages and people who had all different levels of, or different expertises that we sort of brought together. So I was encouraged to take on that identity and see myself as someone who could take this foundation and continue to learn these methods. There's also an emphasis on research transparency, which will inform doing a pre-analysis plan and eventually posting code to GitHub. And then even bringing in a qualitative component is something that I think SICSS, by having people from different disciplines come together, has helped me to think about the strengths of bringing in a qualitative approach in addition to the quantitative approach. And potentially, I will be using crowdsourcing to validate the phenotype construct. One of the things that our team discussed a lot internally since submitting the proposal is that we aren't actually the experiment didn't actually randomize race, because race is a social construct, but we did randomly assign a phenotype. And so I think being really careful about our language and about how we can imply any findings we have in a simulator, we have to interrogate whether that applies in real life, but also we aren't actually controlling the construct of race, but we are adjusting a phenotype. So thinking about how people respond just to those phenotypes is something we could potentially do through crowdsourcing. You'll learn more about that in MTurk if you are just wondering what that is in your SICSS experience. And then for me, a foundational understanding of sentiment analyses. Web scraping is a tool that my group that I worked with kind of went on a tangent on, and we got support from a researcher, someone who worked at Mathematica, to sort of break down and walk us through web scraping. And unbeknownst to me, I've used it in my master's capstone. I'm using it for another research proposal. And so this was just a skill that I have started to develop, and I really owe SICSS the kudos for tapping into that skill. And then lastly, Nanette had this feedback framework of keep, start, and stop. And I have repurposed that and intend to keep repurposing that to just make different things that I facilitate better and hopefully solicit good feedback from everyone involved. And with that, I also want to acknowledge both the SICSS funding, but also the funding for the initial experiment, which came from the UVA Banker Fund for Political Economy. And I want to cite my sources and also provide my contact if you have thoughts or suggestions or questions about the project. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you all for watching. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list.